Okay, so first of all, again, my name is Jonas Novak. I'm the communications coordinator for the town of Bennington. I've also been appointed by the town of Bennington to be their official 250th anniversary planning liaison to the state, and I do sit on the state Vermont 250th anniversary commission as well. So thank you for inviting me back. This is my third visit to the village trustees to talk about this idea of a pathway from the monument down to the corkscrew railroad. What we have here, this is a historic postcard from the early 1900s showing the monument with the old North Road still in existence, and then of course ending at the old red covered bridge which used to span the Loonsack River at the base. And that red bar at the top indicates that section of the North Road that we're going to be talking about tonight. This is an overhead view of that same section, looking at the tax maps. And you can see the circle in the bottom middle of the slide is Monument Circle, and in the middle of that is where the Battle Monument is located. And then you see there's a green arrow pointing to a green section. That green section is the right-of-way of that old North Road that is under the control and owned by the village trustees of Old Bennington. The white section above that and continuing off the top of the map, that is the right-of-way that is owned and controlled by the town of Bennington. You can see on the bottom left, I've sort of put a little arrow here that's showing an area where there's a red line. That could be an area where there could be a fence or vegetation alongside the trail. And this curvy line is representing a trail. It's not exact or exactly where it would be, but just showing that there would be a trail in that right of way. And then there again at the top, you can see a circle where we're thinking of putting a viewing platform on top of the trestle of the old Corkscrew Railroad, giving another little sight point. And then on the right side, the east side, you can see I put another line. That's an area where there could be some fencing or vegetation as well. This is a map of the Bennington's trail system, and I'll draw your attention to the yellow circle in the middle that shows where the monument is located. And here's that first stretch, right? That little bit of the pathway of the North Road from the monument to that Corkscrew Railroad, and I put sort of a star shape over approximately where that trestle is and where that viewing platform could be. And then ultimately, though, it could continue right down and cross the Loonsack River again, and then connect with the Ninja Trail and the rest of the townwide trail system. At the first meeting, we had a lot of talk about existing bad behavior conditions around the monument that were concerned to landowners. For example, two of the examples, one was using the Ansman's property as a place to picnic. Another was using the bushes in the right-of-way or the Ansman property to relieve themselves. There's also a concern about parking at night, and what are they doing parking there at night? Could that be criminal behavior or some sort of criminal activity? So the concerns where it loops back to the pathway is, well, if we put in a pathway, would that make the current bad behavior worse? Would crime increase if we had a pathway there? And then, questions about, is there enough parking? So one of the thoughts was, well, maybe this is an opportunity that we can use this idea of putting in a pathway to address some of the current bad behavior that's already aggravating people that live around Monument Circle. Maybe we could put in some porta potties. They're not beautiful, but appropriately screened. Maybe having those available 24/7 could reduce the kind of heading to the bushes behavior that we noted. Also put in some picnic tables along the pathway or some areas where people could have a picnic, and then they wouldn't feel the need to explore other areas to do that. And then critical new fencing and vegetation and plantings to protect those neighbors. And we'll go into some more detail on that. This first slide in the blue bar shows the area of exposure for the Ansman property. And while the Ansman house is set pretty far back, they have this large wide open field that can look very inviting for people walking down the pathway. So the thought was using fencing and signage that could be used to keep people directed on the pathway. The largest adjoining landowner in terms of effect is Peggy Hammond's property. For most of the full length, there's She's right alongside the pathway. There is a partial stone wall along a section, and there's other visual features that do present sort of a visual barrier for people that indicates it's private property versus the trail area. But that could be improved with signage or additional fencing if desired, to make it clearer. The third component is the Borden House. The Borden House itself is not visible from the right-of-way. It's about 1,000 feet away. But the viewing platform would be adjacent to the old corkscrew rail bed that provides access to the northern side of the property. And a fence and plantings there as well could be used to prevent access. And that's a pretty constrained area. So that would probably be one of the easiest areas to seal, if you will. What could that look like? I would suggest some sort of stockade-style fencing or stockade picket-style fencing, perhaps softened with vegetation and with signage, I think would be the appropriate way to control how visitors use the trail. Because the question about crime was discussed and is a big concern, I did go to the police department and I got 25 years of crime incidence reports on Monument Circle. I did request the latest year, and I have not gotten that back from them. They're chronically busy. But for the 25 years up to 2021, there was a total of 61 incidents, of which I would say 11 of them, the 6 vandalism, 2 underage drinking, 1 theft, 1 burglary, 1 assault, were on the more serious end of the spectrum. The other 50 were really miscellaneous incidents, such as false alarms or people parking at night after dark, after the park is closed. Of those 61, none of them had a drug code attached, which is police speak, meaning that they didn't see any evidence of drug activity, but there was obviously alcohol activity involved with those. And as soon as I get the information for the last year, I will absolutely share that. Nationally, there have been a lot of studies looking at the effects of rail trails and other sorts of public trails on crime, and they're pretty consistent that they don't seem to show an increase of criminal behavior around those sorts of amenities. Having said that, the people in Williamstown, you might know the Ashland-Wiltercut Rail Trail, say that 3 times fast. They're like, look, we know there's national studies out there talking about criminal behavior, but that's not us. We would like to have a study about our trail to really understand what the impacts are. And these 3 points are from the conclusion of this study. I just copied and pasted them. The first one is that the vast majority of people were satisfied with the trail as a neighbor and viewed as positively as a positive addition. The second bullet says that the typical fears such as crime were not supported by abutter and local police responses, although nuisance conditions did impact some of the abutters. And by nuisance conditions, we're really talking about things like people not picking up the poop after their dog was the number 1 complaint. The proximity of the trail to the property didn't seem to make a difference statistically in how they felt about the trail. So for example, they looked at abutters that were within 100 feet of the trail and abutters that were farther than 100 feet from the trail. Although in our case, of the 3 abutting landowners, Peggy's is the closest, and I think that's probably right around 100 feet from the trail. I'm not really sure, but thinking 30 paces or so, roughly that. But one of the thoughts was, he said, she said, how do you really know? I mean, we see things going on, we're not comfortable with this. Is there a way that we can get some baseline data or information about what is going on at the circle to help us understand the issue and help us make good decisions? So one thought was, well, what about putting a camera in the parking lot, and that's that image on the left, it's showing what a camera could show if it was mounted on the light post right by the parking lot. And actually, that would have been darn useful, right? When Stark lost his sword for the first or second time, having a camera there could have been really useful. The second one is facing the right-of-way entrance. And that one, thanks to Peggy's agreement, I was like, why don't we set up a game camera and get a sense of what we would see, just people, what is the usage of the path now? Because remember, it is a public road, even though it doesn't look like much of a road, it's a public right-of-way, it's not posted, people are allowed to go on it, and they do. So I had given you a report 6 months after, so this is now a year's worth of data, these numbers that I'm going to share with you now. So what we saw were 599 people just walking the trail. We saw 18 landscapers, which was less than the first 6 months, but there's a lot of winter in the second 6 months. Total of 12 people with bikes, 80 people with dogs, a lot of dog walkers, 3 people hunting, 24 people heading towards the bushes, which is a concern. 47 deer, mostly at night. 10 fox, although I think it's the same guy. Have any of you guys seen the fox? Oh, so cool, so beautiful. 18 squirrels and small critters, or I'm sorry, 8. And 2 raccoons, and they're exclusively nighttime visitors. Didn't see any of those in the daytime. So if you add it all up, what we have is 79 animals of all species, 736 people of all activities from April 2022 to April of 2023. So if we're going to build a pathway, a logical question, especially if we're going to talk about what about fencing, those cost money, what about vegetative plantings or even signage or interpretive signage, what about money? So one possible funding source could be the Recreation Trails Program through the state of Vermont. That is probably readily available. They're really interested in supporting these kind of trail development projects. There is a 20% match that would be needed for something like that. There are also the opportunity for small grants for planning. So for example, I essentially showed you some ideas, but you need definite plans. What exactly are those fences going to look like and what exactly the plantings are going to be? That could be part of a small planning grant through a larger recreational grant that the town might do. So I've been spending a lot of time talking about data and numbers and looking at tax maps, but because the 250th is coming and because this trail is at the monument, this makes it a little different, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about that. Although please do invite me back, I've got another whole slide thing just on 250th stuff. But this does touch on that because, I asked here, what do these venerable eyes tell us about our role as a community in remembering our shared history? And that's really all about this upcoming 250th anniversary, because these eyes, and this spoiler, you guys know who this is, many of you do, but the spoiler alert, he's looking at the final approved design of the Bennington Battle Monument. This was what the committee said was going to happen. They had all the muckety-muck said, this is going to be our battle monument, drum roll. The Bennington Battle Monument? Yeah. Well, Highland Hall took one look at that, and he was 80 years old at the time, and he said, no way is that lame grouping of statues going to represent our battle. We need something that's going to be monumental and lofty. And because of that perseverance, although he did not live long enough to see it dedicated, thanks to Highland Hall, we got this incredible, massive, and lofty monument. Still to this day, the tallest man-made structure in Vermont. I want to introduce you also to Mary Sanford. This amazing woman, she helped found Bennington College. She owned 2 houses on Monument Circle, one of which is the Hammond House, and the other is the Borden House. And at the time she was living, the North Road was actually still in use. It was primarily being used for farm access, but it was still there. I'm not sure the bridge was still there at that time. It might have just been accessing the fields. I haven't figured that out yet. Tom, let me know if you ever find that in your studies. Was it still there? Awesome, thank you. And one of the things she did was she would spend her winters in New York City, and she became very enamored of a professor at the City College named John Spargo and his writings about socialism. So she invited John Spargo, who was dying of tuberculosis or some other sort of lung ailment. I'm actually not sure it was tuberculosis. Probably not, because he got to Bennington and he got better. And instead of dying, he ended up sticking around till the 1960s. And as his interest in socialism waned, his interest in local history ballooned. And he founded the Bennington Historical Society. He founded the Bennington Museum. He helped with the creation of numerous monuments throughout town, including the Meeting House Monument, which currently lies flat in front of the Meeting House. And he was the lead organizer of the 1927 Battle of Bennington celebrations, the largest of our celebrations, with over 100,000 people coming to Bennington to celebrate. So these 2 Old Bennington residents together had a huge impact on their community and the way we remember our history, like Highland Hall did. And it sort of leads us to, well, what big things can we do for 2027? This will have been 100 years since Spargo and Sanford's celebration. And perhaps one thing might be a pathway to enhance the visitor experience at the Bennington Battle Monument. Joe Hall made a very poignant remark to me as we were thinking about monuments, because we are also thinking about the Meeting House Monument. He said, you know, there's people that like to read monuments and they'll stop and they'll read the inscriptions on the bronze plaques, but a lot more people will use a pathway and just enjoy it and make it part of their regular life. And that really did resonate with me. So what are next possible steps? Action items, if you will. One would be a letter of support to the state of Vermont, asking them to install some security cameras at the monument in that parking lot location, prevent the next theft of Stark's sword, although hopefully we're past that. There is going to be renovations happening in the near future. Maybe this could be wrapped into that project. Number two is decide. Does the community of Old Bennington want a pathway from the monument to the Coastal Railroad? Maybe a survey or something. And then finally, if that is the wish of the Old Bennington community, seeking a grant to get money for the creation of that trail. And I'm pleased to say I'm 40 seconds quicker than what I promised you to be.
That's great.
So, thoughts or questions? And again, thank you, and I know I'm straining the patience of some who've seen some of these slides before, so thank you.
First of all, I think we'll go to the trustees and see if the trustees have any questions or comments.
You are a trustee.
Oh, yes, I know I am, but I'm a courteous trustee. Would you like to go first?
May I?
Of course.
I have, over the past year, thought about this quite a bit, and I see no compelling reason for there to be a public trail down there. I don't think it's going to enhance the 200 and whatever celebration in any way. People already walk down there. Is this just a way to get free grant money from the state to make paths?
I'll take that last part as a question. There's absolutely money available for recreational trails. There's a lot of interest in developing more trails in our communities. As to the first part,
On whose part?
the state. There's a lot of interest on the state, and they're channeling grant dollars towards. That's why that specific grant program exists, specifically for trail development and recreational development. As to the first one, I didn't want to go too much into 250th stuff, but the fact is we have a history of celebrating and commemorating our history. The fact that we have the monument here is a great example, as you already saw, but there's many others. So it's kind of what we do in Bennington. We have over 50 different monuments to historical events throughout our town. And I guess it's okay for some to feel that that's not a worthwhile thing to do. But personally, I feel that reminding us of how we got here is a civics lesson that our country desperately needs right now.
I think that can be fulfilled perfectly well with all the wonderful historic resources already in the village.
If I could jump in here, I want to make sure that we're clear on a couple of things. First of all, this is not going to come to a vote tonight. I feel very strongly John agrees with me that everybody's going to need to go home and think about this. We're sharing information, we're sharing our points of view. But I don't want anybody to feel that they need to rebut everything. If you choose to, Joan, by all means, I want to keep it. Please, if we can, state our beliefs, and then we can kind of move on. I want everybody to have a point of view.
I do have a question.
Please.
Of the approximately 800 people that used the trail in that 1 year period, was there a specific time of year it seemed to be a little heavier than others? Were you able to document that?
You know, that's a good question. I didn't really look at the individual dates. There was definitely more in the summer warm months, and very few when there was snow covering the trail. Partly, just because the trail is, you don't even see that there is a trail there in the winter.
This is why I asked the question. I think a lot of those are tourists coming to our area, tourist dollars. And if they have an accessible, attractive trail that is inviting, they will use it. And then they'll go downtown and go to the restaurants and do whatever. And as long as they're not taking over our lives with just a couple of months a year, what does it matter? It could only enhance their experience and appreciation of our town and give us some money. which this area needs. We need, we don't have industry anymore, we need tourist spots. So let's encourage them and let's give them a pleasant place to walk that is safe.
Thank
That's
you.
my opinion on it.
Thank you, Susan.
I have a comment and a question. Following up on what Susan just said regarding tourism, so rooms and meals tax is the #1 source of tax revenue for the state of Vermont. I happen to know that. That obviously means that we rely on tourists for our economy. There's a pathway there. We're talking about improving the pathway. Is it possible for renderings to be provided? We saw some pictures of fences and we talked about vegetation. Is a rendering or several renderings asking too much before this group takes a vote or even puts it out to a survey among Old Bennington residents?
What I would say is that there could definitely be planning money to do that kind of stuff. So maybe an intermediary vote could be something like to approve further study in terms of a planning grant, something like that, to see what would the trail look like, what would those details look like. So that could make an excellent first step.
Thank
I
you.
think that should be considered.
Steve?
Thank you.
I was a bit disappointed that there's still misleading information that we had covered, you and I, Jonah, months ago in the presentation that you're still making.
I don't recall that,
About
so
the, about
please
the
do.
crime, yeah, so the crime happening at the monument, which we see multiple times per night, we had talked about how it's not all leading to police reports, but it's been verified by most of the members of the trustees and probably anyone who lives near the circle. There are pretty constantly interesting things going on at the circle. Not to mention using other bushes for the purpose that you mentioned, along the entire driveway. The nuisance stuff that you're talking about is a real problem. And I'm pro tourists. I'd like Bennington to be as wealthy as it can possibly be, and I'd like to contribute to that. But a walkway is not a historical item. A walkway is a place for people to congregate and to be. And I think the thing that's getting lost in all of this, which I've made this point numerous times, is that the impact on the people who are directly next to this is significant. So I think Peggy's in favor. We are dramatically opposed. And if the criteria is, as you had mentioned years ago, that you need to have us on board, I am not on board. I think it's a terrible idea. I think it's really deleterious for the people who this directly affects.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I think there were 3 questions there.
Can we just jump?
Why don't I just
Please.
give you mine, and then you can answer as if you wish to, but then I want to turn it over to the public so that they can have their comments. And as I said, this is not going to come to a vote, because everybody needs to go home and think about exactly what they heard. And I think we're asking for some more possible information before the next meeting.
And I'm sorry, I don't know, just before you get started, can I just finish? There's one more thought that
Of course.
the other thing that's a bit misleading is a year, and I think it might have been 2 years ago. I can't remember when this started. Maybe it was just a year. Part of what you had agreed to was to confirm what was happening as the problems happening around the monument in terms of crime and parking, things happening late at night. And the cameras were going to be put up. And I think that was planned to be done within a month or two, a year or two ago. And I see that's still your possible next item at this point.
So can I address that, because you said twice now that I've said given misleading information?
I'm going to moderate, so.
Yeah,
please,
so
okay.
in the first case, it is true that you expressed your opinion that there's more criminality going on Monument Circle than we know about. And I did address that in the presentation when I said that it comes down to a case of he said, she said, and what we really need is data. And there were 2 pieces to that. One piece was to have the state install the camera in the parking lot. And in fact, at the last meeting, which was not 6 months or a year or whatever you said, it was a few months after, I did bring that suggestion to you, and the action item would have been for, as it is, remains today, for an action for the village trustees to pen a letter of support for those to be installed. That's the only avenue that we're going to be able to get security cameras on state property, as I explained to you.
Go ahead.
And then finally, yes, I did say that I would act quickly, and the only thing that I could do personally was purchase at my own expense a game camera and then seek permission from an adjoining landowner with a view of the right-of-way and immediately begin collecting what is now a year's worth of data. And I can tell you, having looked at those 799 people or 699 people, they're not scary looking people. They're visitors to the monument. And having a place to walk and stretch their legs, perhaps with picnic tables and additional facilities so they don't need to use the bushes, would be an enhancement for those history-loving people that are visiting the monument.
Okay, thank you both. Now I'd like to just make my statements, then I'll turn it over to the public for their comments and inputs and thought. I have two things, and I don't expect to have an answer today, but I would like us to be able to see if we can get some more information before the next meeting. I'd like to know who's going to pay for what. We've talked about a fence. Is the state going to pay for that, or is the town going to pay for it, or is the village expected to pay for that? Likewise, for the picnic tables, where would they exactly be located? On state land, town land, or, God forbid, you say you don't want my land. And then again, what approvals do you need from the state in order? I'm just asking you by the next meeting.
I'll try to remember them all.
No, I'll write it down. Well, you're gonna get the minutes.
Well, actually,
Anyway.
I'll reiterate from the presentation, and I apologize, were you finished, or?
No, I have one more thing that I would like to gather some data on, and remember my background is financial, but when I was acting police commissioner here for the village, I got to know the police department fairly well. And there were many times that they commented to me, as they did in the paper, that crime in Bennington, I think it exploded in 2021 or 2020, it was on my arrival, I didn't bring it here, but that it exploded 100% or some percentage over what anything that had been seen in the past. I think that's, and I'd like to know what that number was and where we are today versus where we were in the past. I appreciate very much the fact that you went back and did the hard work to look at the data from the past X number of years in terms of criminality, but that criminality cannot be projected into the future simply because you look at what happened in Bennington. So I just want to get a little bit of a feel for how much did crime go up and where did it grow up. I think that's important for all of us to be able to say, okay, you know, just this is good to look and say, oh, this is what happened the last 25 years, it's not going to happen the next 25 years. And that is it. So now may I open it, please, to the public, and hang on, please address your questions to Jonah and any statements that you'd like to make publicly to the board and Jonah. Steve.
You didn't answer those questions?
Excuse me, how much you have to keep track
I
of
will.
this?
I'm Steve Korn.
Thank you.
I live on the Corkscrew Railway, so it kind of affects me too, because people will go down to the platform and then, oh, let's see where this goes, and then come up our. But anyway, you said that the only you said that there was a 20% match for a grant, and who's paying that 20%?
So thank you for asking that, because that actually dovetails with the question that Ann had asked. And that $50,000 grant would be the device we would use to be able to pay for amenities, such as picnic benches and fencing, et cetera.
And is that
the
enough?
20% match, though, we don't know where that comes from yet. It could come in part from the community, it could come in part from the donors, but we would have to find that extra 20%, so you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So if this is something, look, if this is something we really want, then I don't think finding that match would be that difficult, but you gotta want it, that is sort of the start.
Well, I don't want it. But
But I would push back a little bit. Your house is at least a quarter mile from the proposed area of the right-of-way. And we're talking about
Yes.
fencing and blocking off access to that Corkscrew Railroad.
right, well, there's no
Yeah.
access to the Corkscrew Railroad now. We still get people coming up and down through our property.
So having a fence and some signage might help. So if you're having a problem now, if we added appropriate fencing and signage, that might actually help the current conditions that both you and Mr. Annisman are concerned about. And that would be my hope for this,
Yep.
that by doing this project, we're actually fixing some problems rather than creating new ones. I don't want to create new problems for this community or any other.
In 2025, all of our houses are going to be reappraised. and I think all of our taxes are going to go up.
That's not true. Let's be careful about
Hmm.
that. From a town perspective, that's not true.
What
So
do
I'm
you mean?
cautious about that.
What do you mean
What
it's
do you
not
mean
true?
it's not true?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, if everyone's house gets reappraised and everyone's house was appraised at 20% higher value, if the town budget remains the same, the
The
rate
building
per
goes down.
thousand is just going to decrease.
Hmm.
So the reevaluation itself won't cause the taxes to go up.
Thank you. Ron.
However, I mean, between or among property holders, there may be
There
some.
could be some shuffling, sure.
We can put that issue down next week to be dug into a little bit more completely. Steve, are you anything else?
Just one other thing, who owns the rest of the road down to the north?
The town of Bennington,
Okay, and then how about to the west?
on the Corkscrew Railroad,
Yep,
that's owned by the Bennington School, VPI.
okay, all right, thank you, that's all I have.
Other public
Good questions,
comments?
thank you.
Ron?
So the crime data that you collected over that 25-year period from the police department, so that's from the Bennington Police Department?
Correct, but that
So-
includes data from
But
the
who-
officer up here, who's technically actually part of the Bennington Police
Okay,
Force.
so Andy included.
Yes,
that.
absolutely.
Would include in that data.
Absolutely.
Any other
Good question.
comments, Tom?
One quick one, just to update that. So when we don't want to be in the business of calling the police 5 times a night with whatever activity we're seeing at night, and when we do call, just in terms of the reliability of those numbers, when we do call, we're told it's not a priority. So the numbers that they have 61 over the past 25 years are just, they're incredibly misleading. And it's just very disappointing to see those shared as if they mean something, when we really do need data.
Thank you, Steve. Jim?
Jim Thatchell, Bennington. I just want to make sure, is the board willing to write this letter to the state to get the cameras?
We had done that.
I thought, because I was at his previous thing, and I thought it was agreed that you would write the letter, and I'm a little surprised to hear that it was never written.
I thought so too. I thought this was done. That was another reason I'm disappointed nothing has happened. We should do
I
that.
don't think I was on board at the time.
Okay.
I promised to research
Okay.
that and get back to us.
We
Either
have
way.
not taken a vote, and we have not taken action.
There was not a board taking it.
Correct.
So that sounds like the first step to me.
If you'd like to entertain that, we can put it as an agenda item.
For next week.
Up next month.
Great, or next month, rather, great. Thank you, Jim.
Kim.
Thank you. Kathy, do you have anything you'd like to add? You don't have to. I just want to be sure everybody gets an opportunity to
How
speak.
comfortable do you feel with the $50,000 price tag?
It may not be enough, but that's one thing that we could learn if we did a planning grant in advance. I mean, honestly, I can never figure out what things cost these days. Everything is so much more money than I think it's gonna be. But if it's more than that, we could see additional funding. But those 50,000 grants are just sort of a flat rate grant, and they may even increase those because the cost of everything is going up. But the short answer is, I don't know what it will cost. You're absolutely right. We would need to firm that up.
Yeah, I think, from just having been the treasurer here for 9 years, there's no spare money in our budget.
I think one of the things, Jen, if I could just jump in here, next month, you ought to try and have a budget, a real budget, that says this is what the total of all this is going to cost. Picnic tables, all of this stuff, plus maintenance, if possible. And if you can't, they'll have to figure out a way.
I think that would probably be more than I would have the skill set to do, because I'm sure there might be architectural design elements that I just are outside of my ken in terms of my expertise. That would lead me towards, that might be an opportunity for a planning grant, so maybe that first piece. And that does give the sort of renderings that Mr. Woods was talking about. So that would be my suggestion. I mean, I could look up prices of picnic tables and stuff, but I think we
Let me
would need.
just say that this is an organization, and we have a former treasurer and a current treasurer, and we're all very focused on the financials and understanding exactly what we're getting ourselves in for. So to ask us to pass anything without at least a halfway good projection of what the cost will be difficult, and be that as it may. Let's see what we can do next month.
But you're saying we need, the way to get that information is through obtaining the planning grant.
Correct.
And how would you do that?
That's something we could probably tack on to another grant, or perhaps even an existing recreational grant. And I'll talk to my coworker Shannon Barsati, who is our community development director, about suggestions for that. It sounds like a planning grant would be the logical first step, so you could get those exact numbers. I think that's a very good
That
point.
becomes an agenda
Thank you,
item.
that is an agenda item for next month.
Correct.
Mary?
Yeah, I'm Mary Walsh, and we had we bought our house a little more than a year ago, and we have one of these right-of-ways that runs next to it. It's right down the hill. And I didn't know it was there when we bought it, and so I'm seeing all these people wandering to and fro on our land and wondering about that, and finally I found out, oh, that's a public right-of-way, you can't do anything about that. But when you're talking about
Which right away? I apologize.
just by the little stream, by Jonah Brook, Jennings Brook,
Jennings.
sorry. And when you're talking about signage and maybe fences and hedges and things like that, that to me sounds like it would be a real improvement. If this is, because I wish we had that on our land. And if they would spring for us to have a fence or a hedge or a sign saying, stay on the trail, pick up after your dog, I would like that. I think it would be a lot better. So I just thought I would share that if it's there already, it's better to put up a sign. Right? So that everybody sort of knows there's some rules to follow, because I'm stuck
That
on
would be
this.
kind of quick and easy too, wouldn't it? Having some sort of signage on the trail now, is that what you're talking about, or?
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, if it were there, I would think it would be better, because then people would know this isn't just a free-for-all here.
that's a really neat idea.
Peggy?
Good suggestion.
Well, yes, I'm in favor of it, and as everyone knows, I'm right there. And in the whole time that I've lived here, I've never felt threatened, I've never had to call the police. I've never seen anything that was, aside from people going into the bushes, which is kind of a human need, and sometimes feel myself needing to go into the bushes if I'm in a place where there's no bathroom. All of us deal with human needs, and I feel that certainly in Boston, in the parks in Boston, there are porta potties right there by the Bunker Hill Monument. So nobody feels that it's a wrong thing to do or objectionable. I actually would love to see the trail go all the way down and across the river with a new covered bridge, because for tourists that would be such a thrill to be able to experience walking across a pedestrian covered bridge. But I would like to see a covenant that no bikes, no cars, just pedestrian use for this trail. And once or twice, people have come into my lower field, and usually I enjoy seeing them, and I have to tell the trustees about this wonderful group of Japanese executives and their wives who gathered themselves for a photograph in front of my weeping willow tree. And I was so delighted by that. I thought, oh, finally someone recognizes that this is a beautiful tree, and they were taking pictures. And nothing objectionable has ever happened to me, even with those minor incursions. And I can tell everyone here that in the winter, when no one comes to the monument, it feels lonely. I enjoy seeing people in the landscape. It's like Le Grand Jatte in Paris, or promenading around Saint-Malo, the fortifications of Vauban. It provides a social scene that's neutral. People, if they're walking and meet their neighbors, they doff their hats, they have a casual conversation. It's a nice thing. I think it would be a wonderful amenity, and I would enjoy it myself. As you know, I love to walk, and I feel that it's not only healthful exercise, but a meditative, health-giving, mental health activity.
Thank you very much, Peggy. One last request of any board member. Susan, did you have a trustee?
Well, it was somewhat addressed, but the way I see it, it seems like the most important thing to do right now is to get that planning grant, so that you can, come up with more visuals and possible prices and such, so that we have something more tangible to agree to.
If I may, I think that's an agenda item that this board needs to vote on as a next step. I don't think that we should go down the path of a planning grant if,
No, Jonah doesn't.
no, Jonah's not gonna do that. We're gonna support Jonah and company doing that.
If we choose to.
If we choose to.
I think that's-
My point is to send Jonah down that path if this board and this community has no intention of voting yes at any point. I think it would be inappropriate.
I have another question. I mean, this is sort of your vision of the things that it could be, and that's fine. It could be a lot more minimal than that, right? I mean, it could be that we put a sign up that says, pedestrians welcome, no dogs, no bicycles, or what, I mean, it could be a lot of things. I don't think we have to get stuck on making it a tour path.
It could be that simple, and we've had offers from the Interact students at the high school, they're interested in helping out on something like a project like that, helping build paths, so it could be done on a shoestring, it could be.
Okay, thank you. I want to move, we have one more.
If this wasn't obvious, I know that you'll come back next month with costs and things like that, but this just seems to be building up to the 250th, and then my question is always going to be, after that, in years and decades to come, who's responsible for keeping it up and who's going to incur that cost?
That's great, wonderful. So that's all will be on the agenda for the next month.
But to echo what Ed said, I don't think I'm prepared to do a study and have it ready for you next month. That's not my area of expertise. What I would want at the next meeting, if you agree, is to have the village trustees express their will for something like that to be done. And then I can look for the grant money to make something like that
I
happen.
agree with
I
Jonah.
understand that. I do think, however, I'd like to see some data from the police department. going on.
Absolutely.
I hope we
Hopefully,
get that before the next.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, as soon as I get it, I will share it.
Great. I want to thank you, Jonah, very much. And I
Thank
also
you.
want to thank
Appreciate it.
everybody here for going along with my procedures for the evening to try and get us through this very sensitive issue, which we all kind of own it. So thank you very much. Thank you, John.
Appreciate it.